I went from a failed startup and having less than $200 on my bank account to helping Aimfox now scale from 200K to 2 million in 5 months.
This is Andrej Persolja, and the lessons behind the growth happened way before that. He had a 4.9 star product, real proof it worked, and a new market that still wouldn't buy. So naturally, in this conversation, we get into the hidden reason good product failed to sell, the system behind the 2 million growth, the message test that cut acquisition cost by 52%, and much more insights from the startup world. Andrej, can you go a bit back in time and share how was life 10 years ago when you started Kobe?
Life 10 years ago was eventful, let's say. So I started out in 2015-ish, and our main idea was that we would just start a company, or the reality was I knew that I had some skills that at that point it was 3D modeling combined with some programming, some development. And we really wanted to create some kind of a virtual walkthrough. Basically, if you were building a house or something like that, or any building for that matter, you would be able to walk through the house before it was built, before it was actually even a blueprint, right? And we failed miserably with that. But in doing that, in launching that company, we met new people and we joined forces with some of those people and we created Kobe. Kobe was my first actual startup. The problem with that was that, so when we launched first locally in Slovenia, and we got amazing traction. We got 2,000 signups on day zero, the day of the launch, because we had an amazing PR backing by the biggest TVs in the country. And that was because we were solving a major problem for kids, right? So Kobe was a mobile app, or still is a mobile app that helps dyslexic children learn to read. And because we were doing something good, because we were doing something that was socially really nice for the kids, the TV channels, the podcasts, the competitions, they were all backing us up and telling our story, right? And so locally in Slovenia, we launched and we immediately got users. The users were happy. The kids were learning. They couldn't, we were getting great reviews. So our average review on App Store and Google Play Store was between 4.8, 4.9 on its own, right? We didn't even ask for those reviews. We were just getting them. So it was, it was an amazing sort of tide that we were riding, right? And then came the US launch. So obviously Slovenia is, too small a country. Slovenia has 2 million inhabitants, right? So that's not enough to support a mobile app. The cost of our mobile app was $50-$60 a year, right? So even if we sold to everybody, and obviously there is only 20% of dyslexic children and so on. So even if we sold to every dyslexic mother of a dyslexic kid in Slovenia, it still wouldn't be enough to have a viable business. So we launched in the US. And we launched in the US with what we knew was a good product. And then crickets. Absolutely nothing happened. We tried to do ads, we tried to do marketing campaigns, we tried to do every, growth hack in the book. Growth hacking was big at that time. We tried to do every growth hack in the book. Absolutely nothing worked. Basically, we were left struggling. We couldn't get users to sign up in our mobile app. We couldn't convert them into paying users. We couldn't get them. Every book at that point was saying that you should talk to your customers, understand why they're not signing up and so on. We couldn't even get customers on those Zoom calls. We offered $30 to $50 on Amazon, in Amazon coupons. If the users came to our Zoom calls, they wouldn't even do that for $30. So there was no traction whatsoever with what we thought was a good product because we had a successful launch in Slovenia. And so that was the beginning of my story where I failed miserable, or I felt like a failure as a, growth person. I was the head of growth at the startup. And obviously I felt like a failure because I couldn't get users in and convert them into paying users, retain them, obviously.
And 10 years later, you already realized, I assume, what was wrong there?
Yeah, I absolutely have 100% of an idea of what was wrong. we managed to solve it in the end. Basically, the last campaign that I did, so this went on for like 4 years. After the 4 years, I basically stumbled upon April Dunford's book on positioning, obviously awesome, which like in that book, April said something like, if you have some loyal customers, but new customers don't know what the value of your product is, you have a positioning problem. I've never even heard about positioning until that point. I went through a startup school. I went through, I was at college, etc. I never even heard about a positioning problem. And so that was exactly what we had at that point. And I was, starting to realize that, wait, like this is so important because like we had this problem, which meant our marketing didn't work, our sales didn't work, our revenue, was down. We spent, close to 50K in ads without having any ROI whatsoever. So why is no one talking about this? And so we solved it in the end by sort of repositioning. So I did an ABCDE test with different positioning options after reading the book. And I found that option, whatever it was, C, outperformed what we had at the moment by a significant margin. So our cost of user acquisition dropped by 52%. Our revenue went up by 200+%. Later, I fell in love with positioning, and I said, I want to quit this startup. I want to focus just on this. I want to focus on helping companies figure out their positionings, because this is killing companies, this is killing startups, and they don't even know about it. And so when the point came where basically the startup got an investment, my decision was whether to commit for the next 5 years with the startup or to go on my own and start a business in positioning. But obviously I had no clients, nothing. So I just had to start fresh, but I decided to do it anyway because I was passionate about the problem that I was solving.
Speaking of this problem, for those that are not aware, what exactly is positioning?
So positioning is basically the context that you're giving out about your product, about your service. It's a reply to who you are, why the customers should care. So what do you do and why the customers should care about what you do? So if you're solving a problem, why should the customer care about the problem, and why should it care about specifically how you solve it and not, your competitors and so on. So it's the thing that removes you from competition and say to the customers, you are the perfect solution for the problem that I'm solving. You and not your competitors, right? So it basically defines how you remove yourself from the competitors, and that's how you can charge more compared to, a generic solution.
And I love that, because you're a true believer in the fact that most companies actually don't have a product problem. While most try to improve their product, add new features, fix whatever, and so on, most of them actually have a good product, but their challenges and their big problem is positioning. How did you end up to find that conclusion?
So the first stage was at my own startup, right? Because I saw that the symptoms that April Dunford lists in her book, obviously awesome, were basically the symptoms that we had. So we had, a few people that were really happy with us, that were happy with our product, that were engaging with us, that that happily replied to every email that we send them and so on. But most of the people never saw the value of the product. And so we knew that, there were people that were willing to go through the pain of our onboarding, of our funnels, of our website, et cetera, but the pain that we were solving was so big that they were willing to give us the time to learn our tool, our app. But most of them didn't, because most of them didn't have that same pain. And so they basically just, gave up on the way. That means they gave up in the funnel, right? And so we knew that this was a problem. And based on everything I've read up until that point, that was a positioning problem. Later, obviously, I validated that on, 100+ companies working on one-on-one. I have a positioning framework on Miraverse that was downloaded, I think now more than 500 times. And it gets I get a confirmation every time I get a happy letter by a founder who says, we were stuck at 3 million, 5 million, 10 million. We couldn't find a way forward. And that was because our positioning was starting to break. So in the beginning, you set up with a vision, and obviously the product has to do the heavy lifting in the beginning. So you have to get to like the first, if you're a SaaS company, I mostly work with SaaS. So most of my experience is from SaaS. So that's what I can talk about. But if you're a SaaS, the first million almost has to be done with a combination of a good product and a founder who is willing to hustle to like his way or her way to the sales, right? After that, you start to build that positioning story, that narrative up of why you're important in the world. Because you can analyze the first million and say, okay, these are the ICPs, these are the companies that we work with, or these are the people that we work with, and these are their pain points, and this is why they choose us. You can't do that with zero sales. So the first million is almost always made with like just the product being good. But after that, it's not about the product anymore. It's basic because a lot of the products actually converge. And so what happens is the positioning becomes important because you have to start competing with different alternatives, with different competitors. And so that's how you then grow past, whenever you're stuck. And so every time I get, happy founders saying something like, we were stuck at 3 million, 5 million, 10 million, and we figured it out because of something that you said in a YouTube video or in your newsletter or whatever, or podcast or whatever, I get a confirmation that like the pricing, packaging, positioning becomes more important as you scale than the product itself, right? Because otherwise, like Salesforce isn't a great product. It's just positioned in a way that it solves a real pain, and now it's being sold still because it de-risks the person's career. The person who is choosing Salesforce over something else basically risks less if they go with Salesforce than something else. And that's where their value is. But it doesn't mean that it's a good product. It just means the product has value. And that's it. And that's what you have to be looking for. Building the product's value, not the product itself. A product with less features might actually be more valuable than a product with more features, for example.
And what makes a product valuable in that sense? Like, because when you describe it, like, at the beginning, positioning is less important, but as you grow, it's becoming more and more important. So what founders should be focusing on at the beginning when it comes to the value of their product?
In the beginning, I would say, like, build not the like minimum viable product as it's often thought, but build a good product, like what you consider a minimal good product. Something that, you're still slightly embarrassed by putting into public, but at the same time, you have some confirmation that it works, some confirmation that it provides value to the customers. Value to the customers can be basically anything. It depends on it really comes down to how we choose products, right? So take, cars, for example, right? So if I'm buying a new car, I have a set of parameters of like how I'll buy a car, right? So for example, for me, what's important for me is going to be speed, power, how much does it grip from the corners, whatever. I have a set of parameters or like needs that I want satisfied. For my girlfriend, it's going to be something else. It's going to be, the color of the car and, does it have a manual or automatic transmission, et cetera, et cetera. So she has a different set of parameters. It's the same with your users, right? In the beginning, you have to map like what is important for my users. So what's the pain point that I'm solving? So cars is going from point A to B. And then how am I solving it in a unique way? And you have to sort of map that out as you go, right? So in the beginning, as a founder, for example, if we're talking about 0 to 1, so 0 to 1 million, I would say figure that out as you sell. So try to sell as much as possible, but at the same time, talk to the customers that you're selling to. Because if you talk to the customers that you're selling to, they're gonna share like why they bought from you, how they went through making that decision. And as you get those answers, you'll be able to find patterns. And so when you're at, let's say, a million of revenue, you're going to have patterns that you'll take a look at the notes and you'll see, okay, that's a pattern that like basically, I don't know, 67% of our users say that they choose us because we have the fastest inbox refresh rates, for example, at Aimfox. So we know that's something that's important to the customer. So now what do? I can take that inbox refresh rate and I can put it on the website and I can put it into the email as the users onboard themselves. They get automatic emails, so I can put it as part of my communication there. I can use it in my LinkedIn post. I can use it in my, any marketing communication and so on. And because that's important to the customers, I'm attracting not just new users, but I'm attracting the right users because they're the same as users that already converted into the product. And so growth becomes easier. And now if you want to sort of go next stage, if you go from like 1 million and on, and sometimes it's going to be 1 million, sometimes it's going to be 3, sometimes it's going to be 5, it depends on the industry. But as you grow, predicting what's going to be important next, so what do the users need next to what we're already giving them, becomes equally as important so that you can continue growing, because at some point you're going to run out of the users that you were selling to and you'll need to open a new segment of the users. And that's where sort of positioning can help you predict what the next feature should be or shouldn't be. Should you be making a bet or shouldn't you? And that obviously becomes important because development is expensive and the development time is expensive as well.
Indeed. And what's interesting that a lot of founders and business owners in general knows that they have to talk to their customers. They have to understand and see these patterns, but most of them, they have no idea where to start or what type of questions or directions to go in those customer interviews in order to get the real insights that will show them that patterns. What would be your advice for them?
I would say do it in casual conversations first. You don't need like formal interviews. So to get customer data, you don't need formal interviews that are structured around, the exact questions that you need to figure out whatever. Like you don't need that. You just need have a coffee with if you're serving users that, if you're passionate about the pain point or if you're passionate about solving a problem for the users, you'll anyway enjoy having the coffee with these users on a semi-regular basis. I know that everyone's busy, right? But you can take a moment to grab a coffee with someone that's been a paying user for the past 3 months or whatever. So just do that. Like most of the knowledge, most of the insights that I get, they're not from structured interviews. We barely do any of those. But we do have, for example, a Slack community with Aimfox where users can reach out or talk about just about anything they want. And yeah, mostly it's going to be, customer support questions, but customer support question open up, we can always say let's say that a user complains about something the app was down for 30 minutes yesterday or whatever. And we can go back and say, oh yeah, sorry, we're on that. We saw that, we are on that, we are solving it. Why is that so important to you right now? And they're going to get back. They'll be happy to answer that question. And we'll find what's the reason, what's the urgent need that they have right now. And that urgent need can lead to new features, can lead to, new upsell opportunities and so on. So I wouldn't focus, ChatGPT can easily give you good questions to ask in an interview. I don't recommend doing too many structured interviews. Basically, coffee chats are good enough. Just be in touch with your customers.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, specifically because when you are trapped in a structured interview, you are in a defense mode. You're not really opening up, you're not really you, and you're waiting for the next questions or making sure your answer is good enough and so on. And when you have a casual conversation, and I think Slack conversation it's a quote-unquote hack, because there people are actually complaining or sharing their feedback and thoughts.
And it's more than that, actually. It's, for example, what we started doing, like, this is basically where marketing should come in. So you should have someone in your marketing team that is really good at what they do. And marketing, like, a lot of people think that marketing is about, hacking and growth, especially, that it's about, hacking and finding like different ways of growing, et cetera, et cetera. Hack, or like 80% of growth and 80% of marketing is actually research. And for example, what we do is we try at Aimfox, we try to combine both. So for example, we have a bi-weekly, so every 2 weeks we run a live webinar with, partners, with clients often, and so on. So for clients, for example, a couple of days ago, we had a webinar on how a client, an agency, got 5,000 signups using our service in a month. And so that session was a live case study for us, a live case study for the client. So it's a no-brainer, it's a win-win. But also, like, what we get from it is, we get maybe 300 to 400 people and maybe 200 questions out of that webinars. If we analyze those questions, like, what were the users interested about? What did they ask? What were what were they passionate about? We can pull that into our data knowledge, analyze it, and find ways we can, upsell or like build the next features and so on. So it gives us a lot of insights actually come from our marketing. So just, having webinars, you're doing a podcast, for example, it's a similar thing, right? Can you get users to comment on your YouTube videos, for example, and you use those YouTube questions under YouTube videos as a form of research, for example. So there are a lot of things that you can do. It's just that a lot of it, it's, at least in the beginning, it's like a lot of effort and a lot of hands-on work. It can't be automated if you want to do it well, not in the beginning. And so a lot of founders don't want to do that because they're looking for scalable systems. But scalable systems only come in play at, 3-5 million and so on. Before that, you have to do things manually, and you have to do it for marketing. And if you don't have, a head of marketing that does that, find them, because it's gonna save you a lot of money going forward.
And on that note, because you grew Aimfox from 200K to 2 million. So I assume you guys are still in the manual work phase in which you still do a lot of...
Yeah, we're setting out the systems as we speak, yes.
And speaking of systems, like, what system you start implementing first once you saw the patterns, you see exactly the direction you're going, you clarify the positioning?
So, for example, we still haven't solved our positioning 100%. We do not, because we have 3 different customer segments, we still haven't solved that one as of right now, but we are working on that sort of on an ongoing basis. So we are solving it, and we will be on top of it in the next, 3 to 6 months. But the systems that we started with, honestly, we started building systems based on like what annoyed us the most. So for example, what part of my job is the most annoying to me, and I should actually hand it off to someone younger, right? Or like a younger marketer. And then to do that, and so for the younger marketer to do, their job successfully, that means that I have to create an SOP, right? So basically I have to create the documentation of how the process looks like. So for example, for the webinars, we have to have a document where it says that we run a live webinar every 2 weeks. On like 10 days before the webinar, on like Monday, on the week before the webinar, we send out the first invite. We invite people who were at the last webinar or like a specific segment in our email service provider or whatever. This is the template for the email that we send out. Next, on the Wednesday, we send out another invite with some specific topic. We send it out to the users that did not respond. We send etc. So basically, I have to set up the whole flow, and I have it set up because we've tried different things, right? So for example, at Aimfox with live webinars, we started doing one a week. The problem is it didn't work. It basically burnt out our users too fast because like once a week apparently is too many webinars for the amount of users that we have at the moment. And so we changed that to a live webinar every 2 weeks. And now it works. Now we are getting consistently 300, 400 live attendees, which means that we now know what's a successful session. We know what's not a successful session, but also like we know how to get users, how to promote it to users so that the users attend, and we know what to offer them so that we convert them into Aimfox users. And so that can now, because it now works repeatedly, I can now document that and hand it off to someone in my marketing team. Until then, it's on me to figure out the systems because I'm the head of growth, I'm the CMO. We have that as one function. And so I have to figure out these systems. I'm responsible to figure out what works, how it works in the best possible way before documenting that and then handing it off to someone else in the team who can actually run it for the foreseeable future, right? But we're basing that based on like we're doing the system, we're building the systems based on what we're doing already, or based on what works well, and just documenting what we're doing. And at the same time, that's the content that I put on LinkedIn. That's the content that we put into newsletters and so on. So it's you repurpose stuff. You're building systems, but you're repurposing stuff into marketing content as well, right? Because that's the best performing content on LinkedIn, for example.
Indeed. And when it comes to documenting or testing, especially testing new things, like you described, like, do you have a time constraint for, I don't know, how long you're testing an assumption or?
We don't. We are basically following the sort of the basic growth hacking rules. So we do assign tests. We decide on the prioritization. What's the sort of ICE score? It doesn't have to be as formal for every test, but basically what's going to be the impact, what's the ease of it, all of that. Like we have weekly sessions where we brainstorm on things that need to be done in the next, couple of weeks. We then prioritize that. And when we prioritize, we didn't just execute them, but we design how the tests look like and what's the success, like what must happen if the test was successful or what happens or like what are the KPIs, right? So for example, if we are running a webinar, we expect that we need to be running a webinar for at least we have to do at least 5 webinars. In those 5 webinars, we need to get to 100 attendees. Otherwise, this doesn't make any sense. Why it doesn't make any sense? Because we can expect, based on previous experience that I had, that about 15 to 20% of these attendees, we can convert them with a special offer. We can convert them into users at Aimfox. And so if we don't have at least 100, that means that we get at least 20 paying users at the end at Aimfox, the math doesn't work. And so it doesn't make any sense. That doesn't mean that the webinars don't work. That just means that the webinars don't work for us at this point. So that means that maybe we're just not large enough yet. We don't have a large enough user base or, and so on. And then you come at the end of the test, let's say that you run 4 or 5 live webinars and you see that, okay, we've converted, 15, 20 people. And you can now start thinking about, okay, so this worked. How can it work better? And so we have, for example, a list of about 30,000 churned users. So can we get them reactivated through live webinars? Because live webinars is something that's interesting for users. These churned users clearly expressed a signal that they're interested in our software. They were with us potentially for some time and left us. We have a better software now than what we had in 6 months. So can we, for example, take the webinars? Can we do the webinars and get the churned users back as active users by just promoting these webinars to them and so on? And so this is how you start building sort of systems to grow your company, because the churned users, obviously they're already in the system. So it's much, much cheaper to get them back than it is to, for example, get new users in through advertising and, Google ads, Meta ads, influencer marketing, and so on. And so that's then how you start building systems to grow your company.
And I must ask if and how you guys are leveraging AI, because it's such a huge topic currently.
Yeah. You can't really get around it, can you?
Yeah.
Yeah, so at Aimfox, we do use AI in the sense that it is part of the software. So for example, Aimfox is about LinkedIn outreach. So it's about helping you have more meaningful conversations at a larger scale. Now, AI is a big part of that because obviously AI can actually do, in our case, research that helps you write meaningful messages that actually open meaningful conversations. So basically, our clients, for example, they receive about 50 to 55% acceptance rates and 30 to 36% reply rates. And that is because we are not just trying to scale and send a generic message to everyone, but we have tools like AI, for example, AI is part of that, that can help you research like what should you say and help you write those messages that have a bigger impact and so help you have more conversations, but at scale. And so AI is a part, not a huge part, but a part of the Aimfox product. How I use it personally as a marketer, I couldn't live without it anymore, honestly. I have been I was 100% sure that this was going to be a bubble that's going to burst and that we won't see anything productive, that we won't see any meaningful result out of that. It all changed in the past 3 months where I installed Claude Code onto my laptop, gave it access to my tools that I'm using it already. Now, for example, my ClickUp agent pulls up my calendar at 7 a.m., gives me a prioritized list of tasks that I have to do based on the KPIs that I have for this week that was decided together with the CEO of the company in the meeting, right? So basically, I get a prioritized task list that I have to do. And it's all based on data that we already have in the company or in the AI tools. I get, for example, the webinars, the live webinars, because we're already talking about the live webinars. For the live webinars, for example, the biggest pain for me was reaching out to guests who needed to provide descriptions, their bios, photos, and so on. I have a system now that basically sends out an email, gets back the photos and all of that. I input just a photo with a quick description and a possible title, and AI does everything else. So AI spits out an improved version of the title, description, how the email should look like, when should everything go out. All of that, basically, it creates the entire flow for the webinars. I just have to copy-paste it into other solutions, into other softwares, because we use Luma, for example, for the registration page, etc., etc. It even creates a brief for the designers to create a webinar graphic, for example, and so on. So it's like having fine junior marketers work for you, and you just give it instructions, and it does everything else for you. So yeah, for me, I couldn't live without it anymore.
Yeah, I use it in a similar way. I have a Git repository with all the data that is being pulled from Google Workspace, from my Notion databases, and so on. And of course, the transcripts that I have from the conversation, in this case, from the podcast, and so on. And using Claude Code like that, it's such a life-changing, right? Like you are able to have a very smart assistant that has all the knowledge, and without relying on hand-holding or such things that usually humans are good at things. Don't get me wrong, like they are very good. But from a biology point of view, you are prone to errors. But when it comes to AI tools, well, they might hallucinate sometimes, but if they have the right data and context, if they have the right instructions and workflows in place, they can do a lot of things for you. And similar to you, when I wake up, I have my list of things that I know I need to tackle that day or that week, because I have one at the beginning of the week, one at the beginning of the day. And I don't have to make that decision. It's already made based on the principle that I put in there. Personally, I'm an overthinker. And if I'm sitting in front of the things that I have to tackle, I'll oh my God, I'll have to, what should I prioritize? Now I don't have to prioritize. because I know exactly the restrictions that I put into place, and it's prioritizing for me. And that's for me is like I'm saving at least 1 hour a day simply because I don't start from overthinking perspective. I'm just, all right, these are the things that I need to tackle today. And
100% agree. Yeah. And I'm the same way. I'm an overthinker as well. So AI, like I've built systems around that so that it actually like I see overthinking as a helpful thing now because I can prepare way better than an average person can. And that helps me, like that helped me a lot in building my career because like I started building my career as 10 years from now, where do I want to be? 5 years from now, where do I want to be? Like, I do not, like, for example, I saw that I could work really hard and get to 100K revenue, but I didn't want to do that because then I wouldn't have the time to enjoy the small stuff, like snowboarding now, for example, or whatever. So I didn't want to work hard to get to 100K in personal revenue. So how can I do that without having to work hard? Well, I have to have, my name needs to mean something. So how do I build my authority? How do I build my name up? I need to have an amazing case study or whatever, or I need to have an incredible network of people, both of which I started to strategically sort of work on. And so I've now come to the point in my career when I can have both the free time and 6 figures plus in revenue. So it's about sort of designing like the life the way you want it, right? And that's the overthinking part of me. But in order to actually, like where I lacked in the past was taking action towards that design, taking action towards that future. So what's the first step? And just doing it, right? And AI helps you tremendously around that. Obviously, I started doing it when AI wasn't around, so I had to have systems where, I was only allowed to overthink for so long before I had to take an action, even if that action meant that I'm scraping that and I'm not doing it. And that was fine. It was a decision, but it at least like it made me went on to the, like from thinking to execution. With AI now, it's that much easier because as you said, like AI does the prioritization for you, so you can just execute. And you know that you don't have to overthink because someone else, AI finds your podcast episode, reads through it, and that, you've already done the overthinking part. AI has done it for you, and you just get the list that's prioritized that will lead to results. So it's so much easier than it was 10 years ago, for example. So yeah, I 100% agree. Like AI is, amazing in that way.
it really is, and makes our life so much easier. And I want to tap a bit into what you described there, the way you design your life, because I know as well you cap the amount of client you work on. You're planning to move to south of Italy, and all those stuff that help you become not just a better marketer, but a better you, a better growth person, a better person at the end of the day. Can you invite us, if you want, in your brain and tell us how you work those things through, and what are your big no's there, what are your hell yeses, and so on you think through the process?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a loaded question because there is a lot that I could unpack. But basically, like, I've set up systems around my work and around my life, if you want, where I'm trying to figure out on a sort of daily basis what went well, what didn't go well, and so on. And what went well is not just about the results for the company. So, the results of for the company might be positive, but also like how I felt doing them, right? So at the end of each day, I have a prompt, if you will, asking me, it's like, this is not AI, but I'm basically journaling, but I'm journaling to a prompt where I have to answer a question on like a few questions, but basically like what went well, what didn't, what was really annoying, what drained my energy, and so on. And so my goal is basically to understand how I function, right? So for example, I found that having too many Zoom calls, one after the other, is just a no-go for me. So what I'll do is I'll design my work, my day, to not involve as many Zoom calls. Now, what happens when you get a good opportunity that involves having too many Zoom calls each day, consecutive, like what just one after the other? What happens then? Do you say no to the opportunity or do you say no to the Zoom calls? And this is where the sort of designing your life and like your life vision then comes in. Because if the priority right now is scaling and going from 100K to 300K, I'm happy to then take too many Zoom calls for a limited period of time because that's a part of the process, right? So I have a good opportunity. I have a client that came in and said, we are paying you 10K a month and you're going to be managing 3 teams, which means, it's a huge project. That means a lot of alignment and so on. That means a lot of communication, a lot of Zoom calls, etc., etc. So am I prepared to say yes to that or do I reject it? And it will depend on what the priority is right now. So right now, if the priority is scaling from 100K to 300K, I'm going to do it. If the priority is, no, I want to take some rest, I want to recuperate, I want to spend time with my family, whatever it is, I'm going to say no. Even though it's a good opportunity, it won't make me happy for the next 3, 6, whatever, 9 months, right? But it's about being really honest with yourself about what you want from life. And it's about designing the steps to get to that point. I think most people are not honest enough with themselves to actually do it. And those that do, in the vast majority of the cases, the way I see, lead very happy lives. So, I believe that most people, not everyone, but most people are exactly where they deserve to be. So if you find yourself struggling on like getting revenue or you're getting revenue, but you're not happy, ask yourself, like, what has to happen for X to be true? So what has to happen for a company to be able to pay me 5K a month? For me, a company can pay me 5, 10, 15K a month because I'm bringing 10X of that in revenue back to them. So my ROI is 10X. And it has to be if I want to have that kind of a salary, right? But that was kind of how I see the designing your life part of the conversation. Like, you see where you want to go and you take the next steps as the team. Basically design the steps that you have to take and then you take them.
And that exercise that you mentioned, to actually journal and be honest with yourself and how and what drains you, what energizes you, it's such a good way of looking at things, because without understanding exactly where you are, what you are doing, and just going by the motion and end up in a point where you're like, all right, I'm drained, but I have no idea why, I'm not fulfilled, I am feeling that or that. Without clarity, it's so hard to make decisions and design the life that you want to live. And I love that. And for those that resonate with what you share, they want to connect with you or work with you, where they can reach out?
Just on LinkedIn. If you want to find me, Andrej Persolja on LinkedIn, I'm always active, sometimes too much, even during the weekends and all of that. So just shoot me a message and always be, happy to connect.
Awesome. And I put the links down below as well. And I want to conclude with one question. What would you say to Andrej in those years at Kobe, if you were to go back in time?
Probably a couple of things. One is, if as a marketer, the product isn't selling, it's not necessarily your fault. That was like one of the things that kind of pushed me into like just trying to always do the best that I can, was the fact that I felt sort of like a failure because I couldn't scale my first startup. And so whereas the truth is that sometimes even good products don't have a market. Maybe just like the timing can be wrong and so on. So a lot of it is down, especially in the 0 to 1 phase, a lot of it is down to the product. So you might be a better marketer than you believe. So, just don't blame yourself as much. That would be the first thing that I say. The second one is get help. The second one is definitely like have someone on your side, because I've always had that. I've always had a really good support network that made all the difference in the world. And the support network being, for example, my girlfriend who was with me throughout, the good and bad. I've had friends in business and outside of business who kept me sane at, the best and the worst of times, and, kept me sane in the worst of times and kept me grounded in the best of times. So I would say, like, get support. If you have someone in your network, or if you don't, reach out to someone who has been through that, have a conversation, pay a consultant, whatever you have to do, but just reach out to someone who knows what they're doing, because this is going to take, like, it can help you put things into perspective. It can help you give that clarity that you talked about, Gabe. And that clarity is, you can't put a price on that. When you know what you have to do, and you know where your strengths are, and you know how to, take the next steps to get you to the life that you want, it's just about execution, and it just takes time, but you know that you're on the right way. Whereas if you don't have that clarity, you might just be running in circles. So I would say get help.
This was Andrej Persolja on Authority in the Wild. If this conversation made you think differently about positioning and products, you know what to do. Reach out to Andrej, subscribe to the show, and make sure you follow along to not miss the next one. Until next week, pura vida.